Welcome to my entryway. Kind of hard to show with the camera angles how small the room is, but right now I've just got nice hanging storage and a good little nook to put boots and shoes in. I want to change that up. I'd like to put a little bench in. On top you can sit down, take your shoes on and off, put them in a storage spot so they're out of the way, easier to clean the floors, keeps it nice and organized on the way in. Hanging space, obviously it has to change. If I'm going to put a bench, this will be in your way. So I think I'm going to put some hanging racks along the wall and have an idea for that. We'll see if it works out. So come along, we'll see what we can do today. First off, I want to start, get all this stuff out of the way. Next, let's rip this out. As you can tell, it was on there pretty good. All right. I have my rough dimensions here, so I'm going to go and lay them out a little bit wide, and from there I'll cut them out with my track saw and I'll bring them over to the table saw to get them cut more accurately for the cabinets themselves. I'm going to be painting these, so I'm not too concerned about which phase of the plywood I'm going to be using right now. Well, that's where today's project starts. I didn't get to the bench top this weekend. I have to source out, I think I'm going to use some red oak. I'm going to go 17 inches out, so I'll have to take a few boards, mill them down, glue them all up. And then none of these corners are square, and it's a little bit of a gap, so I'm going to have to scribe in each side. So stick around, I'll make a video for that one. Showing you how you can lay out and get all three sides scribed in perfect, and then the top should set right into place, provided these walls don't get too out of whack a few inches above where the bench top actually needs to sit. The cabinet itself is leveled out, so as long as I get the bench top flat, we should be good. And then for the back wall, I'm not sure exactly what I want to do yet. I know I have a coat rack system I want to install. I just have to build it. It's a bit of a process. I've made a smaller one before, but I want to get the matching red oak to the bench top, and I'll do a separate video on that one. That one I'm pretty excited for. I've done one, but I haven't done one to this scale. And then I'm not sure what else to add onto this. I don't know if I want to do some accent panels on the back, some decor above the rack. I'm not quite sure. So if there's anything that you can think of that would look good in here, please give me a shout, give me an idea, add it in the comments. That'd be great. Thanks for sticking around on this one. Hope you have a good day. Here I start by hauling in the material for the bench top. I wasn't sure if I wanted to use rough sawn or clean planed lumber, so I picked up a bit of both. As you can see, I decided to go on the rough sawn lumber. I'm getting an eye on the pieces, seeing which face I like and how I want to orient them. as well as getting a rough idea of what it'll look like with the banding on it. I think that'll do. I take my first piece over to the miter saw and I start the milling process. After cutting them down to size, I run them through the joiner to clean up the edges for the glue, as well as the bottom to get it ready for thickness planing. And then I bring them over to the planer and I start to mill them down to a rough, uniform thickness. I'm not too concerned about a perfect match in the height, because a rough look will help hide that as well as go with the aesthetic I'm looking for. After that, I get the clamps ready and I start the glue up process. Here I'm putting masking tape over the clamps so the aluminum doesn't pull into the glue and stain the wood. I get a good coat on all the surfaces and I'm trying to make sure I get the least amount of squeeze out on the top as possible. Once I have that all done, I move on to the scribing jig. Here I cut up some leftover paneling from my camper rebuild into 5-inch strips. I cut 3 pieces, one for the back wall and one for each side. Then I bring them into the house and I scribe the gaps using just a carpenter's pencil. I hold it widthway so it holds that largest gap that I have. I bring them back into the garage and I can start to cut the profile out on the bandsaw. With all the pieces cut, I then bring them back to the house to check for the fit, as well as glue them together. This gives me a stencil that I'm able to pick up, bring with me, and lay on top of the bench top in the garage. Here I use a little tape to hold the stencil down, as well as my mini anvil, just to make sure it doesn't move, and I trace my jig out onto my bench top. Once I have a good line established, I can move on to cutting it out. Here I'm cutting just up to the line. I'm not taking any of it, using the jigsaw, bandsaw, and circle saw. I don't want to get too aggressive with this. I want to be careful to not remove too much, because as soon as you take too much away, you can't put it back. So I'm leaving the line here, and once I finish getting the rough cuts done, I move on to using the belt sander. This allows me to take away any of the misaligned cuts and clean it up really nice, as well as give it a slight angled bevel so it drops down into place a little better. Then I move on to laying out where I want the banding to go. So here, I've just got a strip of the metal band and a framing square to make sure it's square to the front. Traced out the exact area I want to cut out, and I'm using my straight edge as a fence for my router. I flip the bench top over and I work on the face. These ones I can just do by eye. And with that, I'm ready to start working on the steel. Here you can see I just bring it over to the cold cut bandsaw to get them roughly cut to length. I leave them a little bit long. I don't want to try and bend them and get them at the perfect length, so here I just cut them a couple inches too long, and I fire up the torch. I start to heat them up just so I can start giving them that hammered, hand-forged look. This is the first time I've ever done this, so I just put a wide tip on my torch, got a lot of heat pumped out into it, and just started. I just want to give it a rough hammered look, as well as try and keep it as flat and straight as possible. And that's definitely a little bit more of a challenge than it looks in this. After that, I mark out where I want to bend. I placed it in my bench vise on my welding table, and I swapped to the cutting torch so I can get a lot of heat placed in one small location. And I just get it red hot and bend it right over. Hit it a couple times with the hammer to make sure it's a nice sharp bend. Pop it out of the vise. In here you'll see I tried to use epoxy to hold the bands down, but with how the bench top is built, there's a slight dip in the center board, so I had to bend the steel to be a bit of a leaf spring shape, so that way it stayed down in the center. And I figured this would be okay because I could just clamp each exterior, and then the leaf spring tension would help hold the center down, which worked really well, but the epoxy just wasn't strong enough to hold the band down. So I decided to clean up my mistake. I wire wheeled off all the epoxy and decided to just go another route. I used the wire wheel and actually gave the steel a nice, good weathered look. Then I decided to just use some bolts. Here I had these 4 bolts laying around in my shop, so I grabbed them, gave them a rough layout here, and decided to weld them to the bands. And this idea worked out really well. I just welded the 4 bolts to it, brought the angles over, drilled corresponding holes through the bench top, set the angles down, and tightened the bolts up from the underside, and it held out perfect. I did hit it with a light sanding. I don't want to go too aggressive with it because I don't want to lose this. I believe this is like circle saw milled, old sawmill style cut patterns with the arch in it. I don't think it's a bandsaw mill. So I really like this look. I'm really happy with how it turned out with the rustic, hand forged flat iron in with the rustic old mill style of the white oak. I think it's going to contrast super well with the nice finished red oak face frame and the green accent. So I'm going to get a coat of boiled linseed oil on it, and well, probably get a couple coats of that overnight into tomorrow, let that cure up, and then I'm going to slap it in place and screw it down to the top. So let's get to the finishing process. I left that finish to dry overnight, and then I brought it into the house. Well, there we have it, another project done. I'm super happy with how this one turned out. The metal banding that was hand forged was probably the biggest trick on this project. It took me probably just about as long to get those in line and not out of whack to fit the dados that I made for it with the router as it took to glue up and do the rest of the woodworking on the whole thing. It metal moves in some pretty funny ways, so it was pretty fun. It was the first time I've ever tried it, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. I was going for that rustic aged barrel look, and I think it came out really well. I'm happy this is going to be kind of a really good welcoming spot to come into the house. So it's really cool to be able to walk inside and see it every day and kind of, yeah, I made that. That's pretty exciting. One of the reasons why I like to do this stuff. But next I just have the hanging rack to go up above. I have the lumber outside. I don't think I'm going to be using this rustic white oak. I think I have some red oak that it'll be a nice clean plain board that'll kind of match the trim. But yeah, so stick around for that one, and thanks again for tuning in today. I hope you have a good one. So I think this is the material I want to use. I really like this dark centered grain pattern in this piece. The only thing is it's not stable. So I think I'm going to have to stabilize it with a little bit of epoxy just to make sure as I cut this up it doesn't get too crazy on me. But I'll probably end up using mostly somewhere around this area. So it shouldn't be too bad. Just get a little epoxy. I'll probably dye it black. I kind of like that look. And then it'll take about 2'10", 2'8" out of here. And that's what we'll put up as our coat rack. So let's get started. Okay, so now I think we're at a good progress update point. I have all the pieces cut out. I did kind of screw up. I should have dadoed the slot for the flat stock that's going to be holding all of this together before I chop them into the individual pieces, but oh well, I can still get that laid out. They're all cut fine. It'll just take a little bit longer now. I have to get the holes drilled for the pivot point on all of these, and then cut the angles to allow each one of these to be able to pivot. The game plan is every other will pivot and will be able to be used as a coat rack, bag rack, whatever you need to hang. These will pivot out whenever you need them to, and then when you don't need them to save space and just for aesthetics, they pivot back in, and it'll look just kind of like this, just like one continuous grain board hanging up on the wall. And then when you need a practical, more hanging space, people come over, you can grab one of these, pivot it out, and hang a bag or something up. So now all we have to do, angles cut, holes drilled, dado cut, get it all laid out, assembled, and finished. So let's get to it. All right, we've got it all assembled. The back bar is screwed on to all the stationary pieces. All the pivoting pieces are properly working. So I'm really happy with that. The functionality is all here, so now we're just on to the finishing process. I have to cut this rod to the proper length. I want to recess magnets into the back of all of these, so when they're pivoted up into the top position, they're held to that flat stock on the back so they never drop out. And then I just have to sand it and get a couple coats of finish. So let's get to it. Well, thanks for sticking around for this build. I'm really happy with how it turned out. This is a really good functional piece of, I would say, art. It's able to be useful when you come home, keeps jackets up out of the way, away from the boots and the water that you trek in, because it's the winter here. There's snow, you track it in no matter what. But it's also just pleasant to look at. It ties in with the cabinets incredibly well. I'm very happy with it. Let me know what you would do with something like this. Where would you put it in your room? What kind of things would you like to put on it? Or any ideas of what might help make this better? Comment those below and subscribe. I've got a few more projects down the pipeline and I'd like for you to tune in. I appreciate you sticking around for the video today. Have a good one.